Throughout all of NBA history, only 3 wing defenders have ever brought home more than one Defensive Player of the Year award. Sidney Moncrief went back-to-back in the first 2 seasons that it was given out, and 7 years later, Dennis Rodman won his second in a row as a member of the Pistons. Fast forward 2.5 decades, and you arrive at number 3, Kawhi Leonard. From giving LeBron James fits in the finals to being at the forefront of some historic defenses on an aging dynasty, there was nothing he couldn't do defensively, which raises the question of whether or not he might just be the best non-big defender the game has ever seen. It all started with his agility. The way he could start and stop, slide his feet left to right, allowed him to always keep the ball in front of him. It didn't matter if he was moving in an opposite direction or off balance, he was always in complete control of his momentum. When paired with absurd lateral quickness, that led to lots of plays like this. He also had incredibly flexible and mobile hips, so even when it looks like he's completely out of a possession, in one motion he's right back to preventing dribble penetration and forcing the offense to go elsewhere. And it's that hip mobility that helped him stick with the game's most explosive slashers. When Russ takes his first step, Kawhi's gonna open up while moving his feet to stay glued to his hip all the way to the basket. With all of that agility and fluidity, he happened to be one of the league's strongest players. So after stepping in front of driving lanes, he'd absorb contact to stonewall them, forcing shot attempts to go over the top. The thing is, his freakish 7'3" wingspan made it nearly impossible to create a good look as long as he was in front of you. Here's one where Alonzo G makes a great spin move to create what looks like a decent finishing angle, only for one of those long arms to erase it. Carmelo Anthony made a Hall of Fame career out of torching any defender in the mid-post, and even he couldn't get to his patented one dribble step back without getting smothered by that length. Later in that same game, he faced up from the elbow and actually got by Kawhi's hip with his first step, only to once again have his shot attempt smothered. In most situations, it's an advantage for a perimeter player to get a step around their defender's hip. But when that defender has the agility of a small guard and the length of a center, the typical rules don't really apply. And that goes for all players. This time it's LeBron James who gets the step, and Kawhi opens up before sending his layup off the glass. Sometimes, even getting a full step wasn't enough to shake him. By the time Wade gets into the paint, Kawhi is completely on his back, and it's another big-time block. No play captures the absurdity of Kawhi's length quite like this one. Derrick Rose is able to beat him off the dribble, and with all of that downhill momentum, the ball in his left hand, you'd think that's an automatic paint touch. Somehow, Kawhi's able to reach around Rose's body and poke the ball out from the opposite side. Speaking of which, that's a perfect segue into my next point. You couldn't get lazy for even a second around Kawhi without him picking your pocket. It didn't matter if he left multiple feet of space. One lazy dribble, and he's swiping at the ball with arguably the sharpest hands in NBA history. Not only did he have giant hands that moved at the speed of light, he had a sort of sixth sense for knowing what ball handlers were going to do, at times eliminating the possibility of a crossover. Again, because of the length, the radius of his reach knew no bounds. You'd think the ball is safe, considering G has it in the outside hand, but that's just cookies. These are the plays that earned him his infamous nickname, the Claw. The way he'd hound offensive players with constant pressure, poke at the ball with every opportunity, and make dribbling a near impossible task is unlike anything we've ever seen. And that's if his man could even get the ball onto the court, because you'd also have situations where he'd pick pockets right off the catch. Here's one where he's chasing Kevin Durant around a screen, and as soon as KD touches the ball, he's swiping down to strip the handle. And of course, that requires his man actually receiving the pass, as he had quite the knack for blowing up action. There have been very few players who could deny the ball like Kawhi. When it came to a simple action like a handoff, the execution had to be nothing short of perfect. This play starts with a ball screen that he of course phases right through with ease. Then when Barnes resets with the big for a little two-man game, he tries to get the ball back on a handoff but to no avail. It almost felt like he had eyes in the back of his head. Notice how he's anticipating an extra pass to the wing and positions himself to get a hand on the ball while facing the opposite direction. And in the event that he plays this risky style of denying the ball, only for his man to cut back door, well, I talked about how he recovers from behind. Same thing in the post. He'd use his strength to fight for position while his length and hands helped him deny entry passes. And this actually fit perfectly within the Spurs system because what they wanted to do against post-ups was have him front on the pass while a rim protector stepped over from the weak side to stand tall in front of the basket. This once again unlocked Kawhi in rear pursuit. It looks like they're handing these post-up bigs a paint touch when in reality they're baiting them into a trap. It's a high-risk, high-reward style of play that was maximized by Kawhi's freakish physical tools. They wanted him to gamble both in the paint and on the perimeter, knowing that he was just as effective behind the ball as he was in front of it. Just take this play for example. He tries to deny Harden the pass, fails, and it looks like James has a wide open mid-range jumper, only for Kawhi to somehow get a hand on the ball. The way he mastered the game of cat and mouse really helped him when it came to chasing guys around screens. And I'm not just talking about away from the ball. If he took a bad angle or got beat in the pick and roll, he was absolutely devastating in rear pursuit. For that reason, you'd often see him shade the ball to intentionally let players get in front of him while his length took care of the rest. Did you know that flavored air is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking? With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that utilizes no electronics, vapor, or combustion. It's a new movement focused on bettering habits, led by the sponsor of today's video, Fume. Fume is an award-winning device that brings a wide variety of great flavors to your mouth, including but not limited to orange vanilla, raspberry lemon, and my personal favorite, crisp mint. In addition to great taste, there's no vapor, so you can use it anywhere, there's no nicotine, so it's not addictive, and it doesn't require batteries, so you'll never need to charge it. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code HoopVenue to get your free topper. It's the perfect accessory for your Fume device. Slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. It's chewable for those who love to fidget, and it's reusable. Head to tryfume.com. That's tryfum.com and use code HoopVenue or scan the QR code on your screen to get your free Fume topper when you order the Journey Pack today. And with that said, let's take a look at how Kawhi defended the pick and roll. San Antonio always had a great rotation of drop bigs, so oftentimes you'd see Kawhi angle his body to funnel the ball into those bigs while chasing from behind. He had the agility, angles, and footwork to navigate over screens while staying glued to his man's hip, and that's not a good position to be in if you're the offense. Even on a possession like this where Hayward's able to create multiple feet of space off the screen, Duncan standing in between him and the basket while Kawhi reaches in from behind isn't exactly ideal. Well, if Kawhi's busy chasing his man from the hip, while Duncan picks up the ball and drop, that means the big's gotta be open, right? Technically, yes, but Kawhi's simultaneously playing that lane. This turned the ice coverage into a staple for them. Kawhi's gonna force the ball baseline where Duncan's waiting to meet it, and the usual counter is to get the ball back to the screener in the middle, only for Kawhi to deflect the pass. What this means is that a lot of times, ball handlers just simply couldn't create major advantages in the pick and roll. He'd hound even the best of the best and force them to make a decision without putting the defense in rotation. Here's one where he starts with aggressive pressure before dropping under a screen. Duncan contains the ball for a brief moment while he recovers to get back in front, and when DeMar tries to reset, he's met by the claw. Here's a real similar one, except this time he's gonna chase James Harden over the top of the screen, once again funneling him into that drop, while he gets back into the play for a block from behind. He could dictate where offensive players went with the ball more than any player I've ever seen. He wants Matt Barnes to attack the middle where he's got help, and when Barnes tries a crossover, it's taken away. Occasionally, you'd see him get aggressive and actually jump over the top of the screen early. Usually, offensive players will react with a crossover to reject the screen, but he's already anticipating that and reaching in for a steal. Very rarely would you see an attacker reject the screen successfully and get by him on a drive. But remember when I said that he's pretty good at chasing from behind? The truth is, when he was playing at the point of attack, there wasn't anything he couldn't do. If he decided to go under a screen, he still had the length to get a hand up and sometimes even block pull-up threes. And if he did find himself taken out of the play by an effective screen, he could peel onto the roller to eliminate that pass. It all comes back to those one-of-one hands. It's nearly impossible to shake the guy, whether that's with or without a screen, and as soon as you look for someone to get the ball to as an outlet, he's making a play on that as well. As a result, he could completely disrupt the flow of an offense through his on-ball pressure. Here's one where he funnels his man baseline as help waits down low before snatching up a pass to the middle. This time it's way out near half court where Luol Deng tries to set up the offense, and what looks like a routine pass again gets taken away. The NBA didn't start tracking deflections until 2017, but I feel confident in saying that a young Kawhi would have produced some outlandish numbers. Even in the years we do have, he's consistently looked great, never falling below 2.5 and peaking at 3.5 in his first year on the Clippers. If we take those numbers as a percentile versus the rest of the league, he's consistently been in the upper 90s with only 1 year falling below the 96th percentile. Keep in mind, this is what I would consider to be a post-prime for Kawhi defensively. I'd argue he played his best basketball on that end early in his career. Many would point to his 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards and say those are his best seasons as a defender, and I'd probably agree, but I'd group the 2013 and 14 seasons into that as well to get a nice 4-year sample. While we might not have numbers on his deflections from then, we do have steals, and over that 4-year stretch, he averaged about 2.2 every 75 possessions, good for 5th in the league. His steals actually hit a pretty high peak in 2015 though, where he averaged just under 3 every 75 possessions. And it's that ability to make plays on the ball through his length and sharp hands that turned him into a very effective help defender. Whenever he wasn't directly involved in pick and roll, he was usually the 3rd guy sliding down to tag the roller. What made him so effective in these spots wasn't just the fact that he could take away routine passes to the big man, but how his length also ate up enough space to deflect the skip pass. As a result, he was an absolute monster in the gaps. If his man was spotting up in the corner, he'd roam way over to blow up the pick and roll, knowing that he could still intercept that pass over the top. Even tougher than passing the ball over or around him though, was dribbling anywhere near him. As an offensive player, you had to constantly be aware of where he was, because if not, he was back to picking pockets. Many coaches will tell their players not to help from 1 pass away, but Kawhi's range as a defender allowed him to do so with great success. You'd often see him drop to double on post-ups, and by the time the post-up guy realized what was happening, it was already too late. With that said, his true damage as a help defender was done near the nail, where he could completely shut off the middle of the floor from entire teams. Like I said, you can't dribble near the guy. Even when he's face guarding his man in what looks like a ball denial, he'll use those eyes in the back of his head to swipe at the ball. Whenever he was parked in the middle, offensive players knew better than to try and dribble through the gap, and as a result, a lot of possessions ended up resetting to the perimeter with no advantage. Typically, you'd think that because he's so aggressively playing the drive, it should be an easy kick out to his man, but as we all know by now, that just is not the case. That takes me back to what I said earlier about his range as a defender. He can start a play at the point of attack and pressuring the ball at half court. As soon as a pass is made, he's sliding to the nail to take away a drive, and the offense can't even reset because of those hands. Even if he tries to make a help play and the attacker is able to find his man on the perimeter, they still have to make something happen off the catch while he closes out. And he was an otherworldly closeout defender. The agility to get out to the three-point line and the length to contest meant no spot-up shooter had it easy. If they tried to use that hard closeout to their advantage by making a quick move off the catch, then it's right back to dealing with that all-time level man defense. His ability to cover ground really stood out whenever the Spurs used him as a low man. If he was on the weak side and the rest of the defense was compromised, he could drop to the paint and make a play on the ball. And if the offense countered him tagging low with a kick out to the corner, he could just as easily recover on a closeout and make that a difficult opportunity. So he actually ended up spending a decent amount of time playing free safety like this, especially in 2016, where he could roam the floor and recognize mismatches or breakdowns before putting himself in position to make a play. Usually that meant deflecting or outright intercepting a pass, but every now and then you'd get a flash of some serious verticality. No, Kawhi couldn't be the primary rim protector or a small ball 5 on an elite defensive team, but as a second or third guy around the basket, he could offer some serious resistance. He had the size and length, he had the vertical pop, and maybe most importantly, he had the timing to consistently put himself in the right spot down low. Because he spent most of his minutes on the perimeter, this was only a small part of his game, but he still averaged just under a block every 75 possessions during that 4-year span, which would put him 12th among non-bigs. Like I said though, he was in this role a little bit more in 2016, and that's when he did get over a block, good for 5th among non-bigs that season. We also have defensive numbers at the rim going back to 2014, so we can actually look at a 3-year sample of how players fared with him at the basket. During that stretch, he defended 520 shots within 6 feet, and players shot about 5% worse than what they typically averaged on those attempts. That's a really good mark, and again, many would argue that this was actually one of his weaker defensive attributes. Protecting the rim wasn't the only thing he could do down low though. Another reason you'd often see him drop to the paint was to put a body on bigs and close possessions on the glass. As Duncan got older and they didn't really have any other rebounders, they really relied on Kawhi to carry a bulk of the defensive rebounding responsibility, and he did so very well. No matter where he was on the floor when a shot went up, you'd always see him crashing the glass, and it was pretty clear that Coach Pop wanted him to be that guy for them. His ability to get up vertically, along with those long arms and supersized hands, made him a legitimately great rebounder at his position. Once again, using that 4-year span, he was 6th among all non-bigs at 6.5 defensive rebounds every 75 possessions. When it all comes together, you're left with this remarkable defensive chess piece who pretty much checked all of the boxes. At 6'7" with that 7'3" wingspan, he had a very unique build. With the agility of a small guard, he could slide down and defend ones. But with the lower body strength of an NFL player, he could also slide up and defend bigs if needed. He had arguably the best hands in NBA history, which allowed him to disrupt and completely change the game of opposing offenses both on and off the ball, and if he found himself on the backline, he could imitate a big, both through his ability to protect the rim and close possessions on the glass. That versatility was the catalyst behind some historic Spurs defenses, as he'd play a different role in every game and still find ways to make an immense impact alongside an aging core. Once again, using what I would consider those 4 peak years, Kawhi played over 8,000 minutes, and during that time the Spurs had a defensive rating of 99.2. And in 7,700 minutes without him, they dipped almost 5 points to about 104. If you're unfamiliar with the stat, this is points allowed per 100 possessions, so the lower the number the better. Actually though, because Kawhi missed a decent amount of games, I'd argue that we can get a better gauge on his impact by looking at how the Spurs performed with and without him. Using the league's average of 106.1 as a baseline, you'll notice that in 68 games without Kawhi, they were a slightly above average defense. Then in 260 games with Kawhi, they weren't just great, but one of the best defensive teams of the 21st century at over 5 points ahead of average. And it's not like the sample is heavily inflated by one outlier of a year. If we break it down by season, and again use the league's average defensive rating as a guide, you'll see that in 2013 they were about a point better in games with Kawhi. That trend continued through all 4 years, with differences of 6 and even 7 points, actually performing like a below average defense in 2 of those seasons without Kawhi. After all, there's a reason why he won back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year awards, and why many would consider him to be the greatest wing defender in NBA history. Whether or not he's actually number 1, I'll leave that up to the comments, because I do think guys like Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman raise a really interesting argument. But if we're exclusively looking at a more modernized NBA, I think it's safe to say that we have not seen a wing defender of Kawhi Leonard's caliber, and might not for a very long time. I want to give another huge shout out to Fume for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget to use code HoopVenue to get a free topper when you order the Journey Pack. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Kawhi. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.